All right, Lolo Ramirez, LK Corral, Racing Pigeons, Loft. How do I go for say that?
I
LK
think it's
Corral.
I think just LK Corral.
All right, LK Corral. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. How are you today?
But great. We're doing great. Thank you for inviting us. We're happy to share what we know, right? Or what we think we know.
Well, I talked to Tony Cuevas, our mutual friend, and he mentioned that you'd be somebody I should definitely talk to because you've had a lot of success over the years, and not only one loft racing, but racing in club level. And
Oh
so
yeah.
we're going to get into all that. And uh, tell me, because when we were just about to start, you were giving me the breakdown on LK Corral. Tell us where that came from.
So, L is for Lolo, K is for my wife Kristen, and then I was into Westerns when we first started up, and OK Corral was one of the big Westerns, and so we decided, well, let's just go with LK Corral, and my son's name is Wyatt, right, for Wyatt Earp, right, so it just went, but I have a lot of friends in Texas, and so when they heard about our loft name, right, LK Corral, everyone thought we were from Texas, but we live here in California, right? And
Great.
but
Yeah, the Tombstone's definitely one of my all-time favorite movies.
oh yeah.
Yeah, that's something anytime it's on, I watch it. So, what part of California are you in?
So we border LA County and Orange County. So it's closer to Orange County than LA County, right? We're about 40 minutes east of LA.
Great. And
Yeah.
so, where did it begin for you? How did you get into pigeons? Where did it start?
Yeah, so my uncle, when I was young, my uncle bought me some fancy pigeons, and I was probably in middle school, and so I had tumblers, I had fantails, right? I had just a bunch of different type of pigeons, and then high school started. I had to put a pause on the pigeons. I went to college. I met my wife, and then we had a barbecue at a friend's house, and her dad was racing pigeons, right? So I got to witness my first race, and once you get the pigeon bug, it really doesn't go away, right? It just hibernates. So it came back in college. My wife and I get married. We get a house, and one of the first things that came up was our loft, right? So that's how it started. But I think every one of us has a similar story, right? It's if that pigeon bug hits you, it just does. It's hard for it to go away, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're all a little bit crazy in a good way. We love our
oh yeah.
birds. So, when did you, at that point, start getting into the racing side of pigeons?
So we built the loft in 1997. We got married in 1995, built the loft in 1997, and we our first season was 1998, right? And so, we started with a small set of birds that I had gotten from people. I had bought a bird from Willem de Bruin, and back in those days, right, or even today, we believe that there's there are birds that are better than others, and so why not breed more from the better, right? And so right from the start, we were doing polygamy breeding. We this bird that I bought from Willem de Bruin, we could breed 30 youngsters from him, rotating different hens and using pumpers, and that's how we started, right? And so 1998 was the first year we win, I think maybe first club, and I forgot the actual distance. But the following year, we ended up winning first champion loft in the 395 concourse. And for 395 we compete against the east side, which is San Bernardino. I'm more on the Los Angeles, border, and so our birds have to basically fly over the San Gabriel Mountains to win, right? And so, the second year flying, we win champion loft in the concourse, and I think that says a lot, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
And I think what I attribute that to is basically three things, right? The first being the loft. I think if you have a loft that manages temperature, right, that there's not a lot of variance from day to night. I think that's important. It basically helps the birds build condition, right? If you, the loft obviously has to have enough fresh air without drafts, and then it needs to stay dry, right? So if you can manage those three things, I think you're ahead of the game. And then the now I read a lot of books, right? That's what I learned from books. So I applied that when we first built the loft. The second thing is everyone talks about having a good program, right? And so, so we again, I read a lot. We picked the program, we applied it, and we stuck to it. And so now we have the loft and we have a program, and the program basically helped us, keep the birds in top form. And top form is not just during racing season, not just during breeding season. Top form is throughout the entire season, right? And so the first 2 years, we're basically learning as much as we can. We're applying this program and we're seeing health, right? And I would say see health. I know you could feel health by handling the pigeon, but I think if you look at a pigeon, you could see the shine, right? You could see the confidence. So we knew we were heading in the right direction. And then as far as racing was concerned, right, this is our second year racing, and what we did is we knew that with young birds, it requires a lot of road work, right? And that's what I did, right? I mean, I didn't know any better, right? And so, but road work is only part of it, right? I think the other thing that people don't talk about is to build condition. The pigeon needs to basically use energy to build condition, right? So if that bird is fighting is fighting to stay warm at night, then it's going to use that energy, right? Where it could use that energy to build condition. If that bird is basically fighting, mites that are not allowing it to sleep, then it's going to use that energy, right? And so if you basically control everything, then you could start having the bird use the energy for the right reasons, right? And then races, other than the road, right? One of the things that we did, right? We did a lot of road work, but one thing that we did not do is we did not loft fly. And let me be more specific there. Once we started road training, we stopped loft flying. So we were on the road on Tuesday. Tuesday was like 30 miles for us, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, there were 60 miles. On the shorter distances, Fridays were about 80 miles. And, but the birds used, that's all they did. They were on the road in the morning and they rested the rest of the day. When we designed the loft, we designed it, it was about 24 by 8, and it was broken down into 6 sections. And we were only flying about 60 birds. So you could imagine 60 birds in an 8 by 24, there's a lot of space, right? And so one of the things that we did is we wanted to make sure that the birds are not overcrowded, right? And so, I mean, we had each section could probably fit more than double the birds that we had in each section, but we thought that it's important, one, for them to basically build their territory, build confidence with their space, right? And so, and I think that's what we got, right? And so the other thing that we were trying to focus on is basically lowering the stress on the pigeon, right? And so, birds are really smart. You could train them to do just about anything. And so we trained the birds to walk into the crates, right? So I had doors on each section of the loft. And on the outside, I could set the crates. I could basically turn on the lights at 5:30 in the morning or whenever I went out to crate. And then I'd knock on the wall. The birds basically learned that that's the signal for them to go to the ground and walk into the crates. And then off the road I went, right? And I could crate 60 birds in probably a few minutes, right?
That's
And
awesome.
so, and
Yeah.
it's basically all about, reducing stress, right? Because if you have stress, the bird's not going to feel well. It's going to use, energy to basically fight illnesses. And if you could use all that energy to build condition, right? And condition is, I would say it's two things. One is physical and the other one is mental. right? And so when we were on the road every day, right, we flew on Sundays, so our birds rested on Mondays, and then they started row work on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, right? So my wife, she's my partner, she's the loft manager, right? So my wife would be at home and she'd be whistling the birds in as soon as they got home, right? And so our birds did not sit on the loft. If they did sit on the loft, if they got they would if they sat on if they sat on the loft, they would piss off the loft manager and the loft manager would have words with me, right? And so those birds eventually would be eliminated from the team
Right.
because we wanted a group that basically would work with the program we were trying to apply,
Right.
right? And so,
Let's
you know,
let's let's go back for a second because we're covering a
okay,
lot of things here. But you said
sure.
something that there, as you know, with this show, this podcast, they're all different ranges of people that watch. And so one of the things I tell the new guys, and even guys who maybe have been in pigeons a while, but aren't quite where they want to be on the race sheet, one of the main things I wanted to point out with what you said that I think is so critical, and I want to expand on is space for the pigeons.
Oh my God.
You mentioned that you have a certain amount of space in a section, but you don't utilize all that space. You let the pigeons have more territory. You have the pigeons have more space, which allows them to be healthier, more passionate about their loft, that territoriality they have. And it's just like, coming home to a nice, clean, open house versus a small apartment. You're more motivated for that house, and so let's go into space a little bit more because that was a huge thing you said that I want people to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, we know that pigeons fly home for the love of home, right? And so that home needs to basically provide them with safety, right? And so if you have an area where there's a lot of noise, a lot of kids or even animals that are bugging the pigeons, I think that's not desired, right? And so the at least that's my thought, right? So the other thing is we want them to be able to rest, right? And so having mites or anything that basically could bug them, I think that's something you need to try to eliminate. I
Right,
mean, since the very start, I was so against basically having any openings that rodents could get into the loft because I believe that if you have a rodent problem, then I think even if you're at the top of your game today, I think tomorrow you're going to start falling, right? And so you need to control that, right? I think rodents are one of the biggest problems that you could have, and so if you see that you're declining in your race position, then I'm thinking that could be a cause, right? But because if people think that there are no rodents around because you don't see them throughout the day, you're mistaken, right? I mean, we have pigeons, right? That we feed pigeons, and most of us live in areas where we're against the hill, right? And so it's very, very dangerous. And I think if people just ignore it because they don't see it, I think it's going to be a big problem. And so we secured the loft so that there are no way in for any small mice or rodent to get in, right? And so I think that's a big start. The other thing is mites, right? Mites basically disturb the bird from sleeping, right? Or from resting. And so if you're going in your loft and you're hearing any bird tiptoe, then I think you're the manager, you should take care of it, right? And it's
right.
so easy. I mean, we use a product we get from Mexico. It's some kind of red oil. I think it may be used for cows to disinfect cows, right? All you need is a few drops underneath the wing, and you need to do and you could do this twice a year, right? Because I think it's good for up to 6 months. So we've been doing that for a while now, and our birds don't have mites, or don't our birds don't have any bird flies, right? And then the loft is protected, so it doesn't have any way where mice or rodents could get in the loft. And obviously, if you have cats, you need to worry about that. If you have hawks, you need to worry about that, right? Because a hawk that comes and bugs the birds day in and day out, that's going to bring the stress of the bird, right? And if a
Right.
bird stresses, I think it's going to basically, it'll make it harder to stay in top form,
Another
right? So
thing,
just, and what I'm saying, I think this is all common sense, right? And
right.
so do is it and maybe I missed something, Jeff. So I mean, if you see that I may have missed, some common sense that could help, any level of flyer, whether they're beginning or not, then feel free to bring it up because I think
No,
this.
the foundation of a clean loft, keeping the rodents out, making sure your pigeons are free from parasites, internal, external. Those are foundational health plan. That's a foundational health plan that you can build on
Right.
from the start. And
No, definitely. And it starts with a lot. So anybody, I don't want to jump around too much, but anybody wanting to get into the game, right? They hear about the one lot races, they hear about the money, and they think it's easy. But you first have to start with the fundamentals. The fundamentals have to start with the loft and having a good program. That is not something you learn, in a week or 2 weeks. It takes time and it takes potentially, having good mentors that you could visit so that you could follow
right.
you could follow their advice, their program, look at their lofts, right? Look at how important a loft makes, right? So
Well, let's go back. Another point I wrote down here that I really want to have you expand more on is polybreeding, because one of the things see a lot of a common mistake for new guys or guys that have been at just a little while is overcrowding their birds, getting too many pigeons, getting breeders from here, getting breeders from there, and they don't know what they have. You're talking about how you bought a super pigeon and you polybred out of him. What's the strategy behind that? How do you go about doing that? Someone
so
that's listening may want to do that and go that route. Can you go
Yeah,
over
so
how you went
it's
about that?
so first I want to say that not all birds work under that system. There are some males that basically don't really do so well. They pick a favorite and then they just stay with that favorite. I mean, we've been very lucky. Like I said, we started our very first year. What we started with a super male that we acquired at an auction from Willem de Bruin, right? And our style was always, there are fewer there not every bird you have is great. So why
Right.
not take more from the better, right? I think it's common sense. It's simple way to understand, right? So now how you make that happen, right, is just basically you have to have pumpers that you set up, right? And when I say setting up, it's if you want to just view it, right? I mean, they have to lay the if the pumpers have to lay either 2 days before or 2 days after, the main breeders. But if you hold that egg, right, what we did is we pull the eggs and then we rotate them twice a day, right? And so we bring them in the house where it's cool, it's not hot or it's not overly cold, and we rotate the eggs twice a day. And then so you could even hold them longer than you needed to, right? And I said needed to, but you could hold them longer. So if you had a pumper pair that basically hadn't laid when you had expected, you could rotate the eggs, probably hold them for another 2 days, and then if you have enough pumpers, you'll be able to match all the dates, right? And I think, anybody who's had pigeons before, if you have healthy pigeons, you could pretty much get another round every 30 days, right? And that's 19 days of the egg being fertile to where it hatches. And then it's another 11, 10 days before the hen basically drops another set, right? And so
Right.
if you're monitoring your egg laying, right, and you have enough pumpers and you're rotating hens with this male, then I think you could get I would say easily 30 babies. At most, I was able to get 47 that I
Mhm.
recorded in 1 year off of a single male, right? And so, and obviously everything else that I had was a pumper that year, right? So it was, and so it's not that difficult. What you need is when you rotate the hens with the males, you need to keep the male isolated. And so the male had his own section, right? I think it
Right.
was maybe a 4 by 6, and the hens were on either end of his section. And so my wife, her full-time job is loft management. I mean, it's really not that, right? I mean, she cares for the kids and
Right.
myself.
Right.
That's a lot of work there too, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
she was available to go in and rotate the hens with a male, right? So every hour we would rotate a hen, right? And so you could imagine you could if you really we would rotate four hens at a time, and then once that set of four laid, we would rotate a new set of four. But I believe you could do more than that, right? If you have time and you have a male that's working, obviously, the male has to sleep by himself, right? He should basically have lunch by himself, right? He does need a bit of time to just relax and not
Right.
just you're not pushing
Right.
hens, left and right. But for hens, I think that's 4 hours out of the day. That's not that difficult, right? And I say 1 hour, but it could be less, right? I think it could be even half an hour, if not even less. All you need is for the male to step on the hen and you're set to go.
Right. And for those
And
that may be
it's not.
wondering, well, I just want to say real quick for those who may be wondering, you want your pumper pairs to lay at the same time or a couple of days after, because if you're not timed right, they'll bail on the eggs and all that hard work you did. The eggs become, cold and they just won't don't sit them
Oh,
anymore, right?
exactly. I mean, the that's why I was saying you need them to lay either 2 days before or 2 days after the breeders, right? And
Right.
and that's basically 4 days. And if you wanted to, you could basically, if your pumper pairs weren't laying, you could hold the breeders an additional 2 days, right? I've held them maybe up to 3, 4 days and they were successful, but let's just keep it simple, right? Let's
Yeah.
keep it at 2 days before or 2 days after.
Right.
And like I said, everyone has good pigeons, but they're not all great, right? So why
Right.
not take more out of the great? And the other thing you're doing there is you're proving, how good is what you have, right? And for me, the way that I see this is I see it like a math problem, right? And so the way you solve difficult problems is you know one of the values, right? So it makes it easier to determine the other value, right? So if you right you get the concept, right?
Right.
Is the so so my thought is you need to prove what you have, right? And then once you prove the base, once you have a foundation, then you basically just build on that foundation, right? But I think everyone needs to know what are all the variables they have, right? They need to know every single pigeon individually so that you know what you're playing with, right? I mean, I think I think there's a lot of people that are get this pigeon, I would say, bug to just constantly buy and constantly look for new pigeons to bring in. We tried to bring in one or two new pigeons in a year. The reason that we do one or two new pigeons is because that works for us, right? We can't prove too many new birds, right? And then one is we have a small enough loft that we have to control the overall numbers, right? And so if you're constantly bringing in something new, I think you're making it more difficult for yourself, right? Because you should be able to identify every single bird in your loft and what they offer. And
Right.
then when you're looking to bring in something new, you should try to figure out, well, what is this new going to provide, right? And now I know that when we start talking about that, we start thinking, is it basically providing more speed that we need, right? If we have an endurance line, do we need to add more speed? Or if we have a speed line, do we need to add more endurance? Right? I mean, the ratios that we believe or that we focus on now is basically 3/4 endurance, 1/4 speed. When we first started the loft back in 1997, we thought it was basically equal, right? We were 50% endurance, 50% speed, and I could tell you, after the Willem de Bruin bird, we brought in two additional males. We brought in a son of the bull 777. I don't know if you're familiar with that bird.
Right.
It was a bird my Janice had. You
Yes.
know, Carl. I don't know if you remember Carl Dewberry back in the very old
Oh
old
yeah.
days.
Yeah. I
Okay,
have
so
I still have his grizzles in my loft.
Okay, so Carl Dewberry had, he had a lot of Ganis pigeons, and then he started bringing in Ludoclassens, right?
Yeah.
And so I bought, young bull from Carl Dewberry, right? And he was already a proven male, so I think if you could buy proven stock, the better, right? And then
Right.
the other male that I brought in back in, I think maybe 2003 was a bird we called Malta. Malta was a full brother to Natasha, that was first national ace. He was a full brother to Ricardo, that was fourth national ace. Ricardo was bought by Mike Gannis. He was Magic, I think Magic Star is what they called him. I don't, do you remember?
I remember that. It sounds familiar, Magic Star. Yeah.
Yeah, so Malta was basically Borges Janssen, right? And then that was our speed line. Our endurance line was, son of the Bull 777, right? And so we believe that, hey, you need endurance and you need speed, right? And we thought that because, we were basically shooting for 300s, right? And so the 300s, if I mean, obviously we're talking a decent speed. And so our focus has always been, 1100, 1200, 1300 yards per minute, somewhere in between those, right? I think anything, I mean, obviously 1400 is still acceptable, but anything above 1600, 17, 18, and even now we see cases of 2000 yards per minute, right?
Right.
I, yeah, I think I'm not a believer that there's a pigeon that could do it all, right? I think that it's easier, right, to basically reduce your scope to something more attainable, right? And so if you pick a distance and you pick a speed, I think it's more under your control, right? Because now we could identify, what's the sweet spot for this pigeon, right? And when I say this pigeon, I think if you if you don't know what every one of your birds has to offer in your loft, I think you have too many pigeons, right? Because you just don't know it. And when I say no, I think you need to know the character that they have, right? I think you need to be able to handle that pigeon, and you should be able to tell by just in your fingertips who that pigeon is you're handling without even looking at it, right? I think that's when you start making a difference, right? I think if you just have a lot full of pigeons and every pigeon is the same, right? Then I think I'm gonna beat you, right? And I say that because I think we give each one of our birds the respect that they need, and I would say that makes such a big difference, right? I think that people that buy $5 pigeons, they treat those pigeons as $5 pigeons.
Right.
And if you're treating your birds as $5 pigeons and I'm treating my birds as the athletes that they are, then I think I'm going to beat you.
Right.
Right. And so I and you have to slow me down, Jeff, because obviously my mind is going, right. And I'm
Sure.
like, I also want to talk about, one of the things that people talk about, right, is that you know, that there is no magic potion, right? And that back in the day, they basically said there's no magic potion. Everything is basically in the pigeon, right? I don't believe that anymore, right? Back in the day, and I'm talking 70s, 60s, 80s, right? Not everyone could get good pigeons, right? So now I believe everyone can get good pigeons. Everyone has good pigeons. So
Absolutely.
what makes the difference? So what makes the difference? I think the loft is a huge difference. What makes the difference? Is the program you have them under, right? And the program you have them under is I'll give you an example. What we do, right? We do 2 days probiotics, 2 days vitamins. The rest is water, and then they get the best grid possible, right? And when I say best grid, we have for me, I like to offer variety, right? And I know that a lot of the like all in one, right? I mean, all in one says that it's variety. But even on top of all in one, if we use that as the base, which we do, we still add, a combination of pick stones. We still add, egg food. We still add, the red stone, or we still add additional grit to that, right? Because I think sometimes the some of the grid mixes don't, they add so much stuff, they leave out some of the necessary grit, right? And so, and then the same thing goes with minerals, right? I mean, your birds need minerals, right? So I do a bucket of combination of all types of minerals, black mineral, red mineral, and they have it in front of them all the time. Why? Because they need it, right? These are athletes that need to be treated like athletes. They need to be fed the best food. They need to be given the best grit. They need to be given what they need to stay in optimal health, right? And so, but I think I'm saying what is common sense, and maybe the loft is also common sense. The program's common sense. The fact that the breeder needs to know every single pigeon is common sense, right? So that he knows what variables he's playing with, so that he's going to do better in the test, right? The math test, because I think it's really a simple math test. But I think you complicate the problem when you add too many variables, right? And
And
so,
that's
and
what a lot of new guys run into is that they get too many pigeons from here or there, and they
oh
don't know
yeah,
what they have. Although it's common sense, it's something that you have to first understand that you don't want to overcrowd, you don't want to get too many pigeons from all over, and you want to try to identify what your, goal is in order to get the maximum energy, as you said, from your pigeons. So,
yeah.
what is your process with getting your breeders ready for breeding season, product wise, vaccine wise? What are you doing to set them up so that they have the proper energy to pass on to the youngsters?
So, to breed, to basically get the most out of your pigeons, that doesn't start just a few months before breeding, right? I mean, it doesn't just start the few during the molting season, because we know the importance of the molting season, right? It's I would say it starts at day one, right? Our birds, when people come by and handle our birds, they're like, man, your birds are always in top condition, right? And so, but so for our birds are in top condition year long, right? We find it funny that we don't take vacation during the breeding season or during the molting season, right? Because that time is so important, right? To not make mistakes, right? And so I think and I'm going to get to your answers, but what was going on through my head is when I said that is, it is so difficult to get everything 100% right, but it's so easy to make mistakes. You
Yeah.
make a few mistakes here and there, and it's going to affect your year, right? And so I may be saying all this common stuff, right? That sounds like common sense, but then again, I come back and say that, man, you take vacation, at the wrong time, and somebody is not caring for your pigeons, you could forget your performance for the next year, right? And so keeping the birds in top form, watching what is needed at what time. So obviously we feed our breeders what they need during breeding, right? We feed our breeders what they need during molting. And then during the off time when they're resting, we feed them for that period, right? So I know that I've heard many people that they feed them the same thing year long, and I'm whatever works for you, I think, right? Because there's many ways to get to be successful. And if you find something that works for you, then you stick to it. Just because what I use works for me doesn't mean it works for everybody, right? And
Right.
so if you find something that works, you stick to it. So, but getting back to your question, right? So we start off with treatment to clean their bacteria, their stomach, right? We started with enrofloxacin. Years before that, we started with Baytril, right? So we start off with that. Once we're done with that, we vaccinate for paramyxal herpes, right? I know there's a lot of people that don't think you need to vaccinate. I vaccinate only for paramyxal. My loft is protected against rodents. And so my initial thought is that if you're vaccinating for paratyphoid salmonella, you're not eliminating paratyphoid salmonella. You're just reducing the percentages so that it doesn't affect you, right? And if you have salmonella and paratyphoid, I think you're already I mean, I believe that you could, if you're very strict, you could work with that, but I think it's better to eliminate it from your loft, right? And so you eliminate it by preventing something coming in with that, right? So if you're bringing in new birds, you quarantine those birds, you monitor them, right, to see what they're bringing in. You under stress, you should be able to detect, if a bird's under stress, I think you should be able to detect this type of sickness, right? Because I know that if you vaccinate, you could reduce the numbers. So under stress, maybe you're not going to detect it. But I think if you're observant and you're watching the birds during the entire year, and potentially the more stressful time is during the breeding season. So if you're seeing that your birds are dropping condition, there's something wrong, right? And so my birds don't drop condition. Yes, they only feed maybe 3 rounds at max, 4 rounds each. So I don't think that's that much where you're going to notice a difference. But getting back to the question you asked, right? Is we start with a treatment of enrofloxacin, we vaccinate paramyxoherpes, and then, right before breeding, we do a treatment of canker. I need to have a treatment of canker? I don't think so, but we all know that canker exists in the birds, right? When their
Yes.
stress levels go up, they go up. They're going to be going into a stressful period of mating. So if you basically hit them with a treatment for canker, you're preparing them for that kind of stress, right? Now, once they start feeding babies and they're going to be laying another set of eggs, that is another time where the parents are showing a little bit of stress. You may notice some of the young birds basically have not the best droppings, around that period, but it's temporary, right? I think it may be maybe 2, 3, 4 days, but after that, I think the droppings should go back to normal. I mean, we clean the loft daily here, right? And so
Right.
one of the reasons we clean the loft daily is because I think one of the jokes that people say is pigeon racers basically look at two things the most, right? One is the sky, looking to see if there are birds coming in. The other one is the droppings, right?
Yeah.
And why? I mean, I don't know if there's any other hobby that tells you that pigeon people get so excited when they see good droppings, right? I mean, just the droppings with some of the down feathers. That's I mean that it's beautiful, right? And
Yeah.
who else could say that, right?
Yeah.
But
No, our one of our dogs had a health issue a month or so ago, and I told my wife we got to watch his droppings, and she laughed
oh
at me when
yeah,
I said that, calling them droppings. But no, it is important to pay attention to the droppings. And again, if you have 200 breeders, you're not going to be able to
oh yeah,
see. And if when by the time something happens, it's too late typically because you've already
it is.
missed it. So,
No,
like you
I
said,
agree
keeping
with
it
you.
manageable to where you're able to see what's going on. And you said earlier about handling your birds and with your eyes closed, knowing which bird it is. Also, by doing that, you also know, hey, this bird doesn't feel quite like he has the past year or two.
Yeah.
Something, we need to check this out here. So, knowing the way your birds handle also gives you a uh, data that you can continue with going forward, seeing how they should be in condition.
And that's the handling is one of the easiest ways, right? But I think you can just, if I mean, we've heard this, right, from all the old timers. One of the key things, if you want to be a successful pigeon person, right, one of the key things is be very observant, right? I mean, and being observant is not just about catching birds that are potentially under the weather or not feeling well, right? I mean, I think the one of the attributes that we look at the most here is basically intelligence, right? And I think that is so easy to detect in the loft if you know the character of all your pigeons, right? I mean, there are pigeons that are communicating to you, right? Or
Hmm.
wanting to communicate to you. And if you're paying attention, those are the smart ones, right? I mean, if you're leaning back and you're leaning back on your landing board and you have a bird that comes in and starts pecking at your shirt, guess what? He's looking for attention, right? And so, but it's easy. I think it's easy if you're paying attention, you should be able to detect this. And like I said, if you need to know the character of all your pigeons, right? Because I think that's only going to make you a better pigeon person, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And paying attention, especially to your, if you're club racing, paying attention to your race team, knowing what grains they eat and
oh yeah,
when they eat and how they react when they're in their box or on their perch, whatever people are doing. All those little tiny details give you a
yeah.
blueprint of what to expect. And when you see something change, that's
Oh,
very
definitely.
important to
But you,
recognize.
if you're paying attention, and we were when we were racing, I mean, they communicate and they tell you, I'm going to win this week.
Yeah.
It was, if you're that good at paying attention, you could see it, right? And so, I mean, we'd be able to pick the winners from the pools because the birds were telling us this, right? But but getting back to like feeding, right? I mean, so the feeding is an art form, right? We all know this, right? And so, but one of the and I don't want to say we're experts, right? But we measured what we fed, right? And I gotta be honest, I'm not the feeder here. My wife is the feeder. I always overfeed, right? But so my wife would feed, but we had a breakdown of all the feed, right? We had our fat feed, we had our high protein feed, we had our high carbohydrate feed, right? And so we know what it takes, right? To basically we know the distance, we know that they're going to need energy and carbohydrates, right, to basically do that energy. So you basically have to it's like a race car, right? You got to basically fill the tank to basically have it be empty or close to empty when they get home, right? And so it's all that. Right now, how do you do that when it's 100 miles versus 300 miles? Well, there's some changes you have to do, right? That's what makes this a little bit more difficult. But some people have switched that to basically just monitoring, when they're done with the food, right? And so, but we didn't do that. We basically measured, right? We did a percentage of fat. We let them eat the fat. We did the rest of percentage of hard carbohydrates. We let them finish that, right? And so by basically breaking down how you feed, now you're making sure that all your race birds are eating the right percentages, right? I mean, because that's what a racing mix is, right? A racing mix has different percentages, right? And so now we know that a bird that is not in condition will potentially eat more protein, right? So I mean, our Wednesdays were high protein feed, right? That's what we did on Wednesdays, right? And so, but you know, I would say, this is another area that somebody just getting into the pigeon sport needs to find somebody that is local to them that basically could explain this, right? And I mean, if you're only breeding, it's maybe not as complicated as racing because we know that racing is a lot more complicated, especially when it comes down to feeding, right? So,
Well, and the only thing I would add to that for guys watching that need to find a mentor is make sure whoever you're finding has had success.
oh yeah,
you don't want to listen to someone who's always at the bottom of the sheet because they may not understand what they're talking about. Pay attention to the people
yeah,
who are having the achievements that you yourself want to achieve. And
oh
uh,
yeah.
so when you're racing your pigeons on the club level, at what point? This is sort of a complicated question because at what point do you decide that a pigeon has shown you enough and needs to go in the stock loft? Because what I tell new guys, and I mean guys that have been only at it a year or two, I had a conversation with a guy recently about it, is he had a bird that won by 10 minutes and he's new to the sport. I said, you need to make sure, and this is my opinion, take that bird and add it to your stock loft because you're just now starting out. If you send him again, he may hit a wire, he may come out
Oh
of the
yeah.
crate and get hurt. That bird has shown, yes, it may only be one race. He had some consistency before that, but he has shown ability to get out ahead 10 minutes. And for me, who's, racing for a lot of years now, it's very competitive to get into my breeding loft. The bird has to
Oh
show me
yeah.
a lot to get into the breeding loft. I have birds that have raced 3, 4 years for me at a championship level. So getting into the breeding loft for me, one performance isn't quite there. But if I was new to the sport, or if I was just starting over, that's the kind of thing I want to take a bird like that and put it in the breeding loft operation because when you're just starting out, you got to find those types of pigeons and build around them. So, what did it take for you to get a bird that goes into your breeding loft, and what do you think the difference is between what you would do versus someone who's maybe still trying to build their
Right.
family?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to just basically say that, with anything you do in life, you first have to crawl before you walk and before you run, right? And so to me, that means a lot. And if you apply to pigeons, well, you first have to walk, right? And you first, and so you start the way that you said, right? If once you start having some success with some birds, then potentially move them into the breeding loft, right? And because you need to build good breeders, so you got to start somewhere, right? But
Right,
for us and for this sport, it's all about competition. Sorry, it's all about selection, right? And so anyone who doesn't do selection, I think I'm gonna beat you, right? And I say that and I repeat that because it's all about who makes the least amount of mistakes, right? But it's this whole thing is a learning process, and you can't rush. You're not gonna rush, learning about pigeons. Like it takes time, right? And it takes experience, I think. And so you got to start somewhere, right? So I think one of the things that I want people to learn is that if you're thinking you're going to get into the one loft race game and you're going to instantly basically hit, it's possible, right? Because
yeah,
I've seen cases like that, but a lot of that is luck. Now, can you be consistent year in and year out? I don't think so, right? Not without basically putting in the work that it takes. So
right,
now what we did, right, is we so I'm gonna I'll give you some stats just to give you some initial stats and then basically tell you kind of what we started doing towards like maybe the fourth or fifth year, right? And so that we started our first year flying in 98. Second year basically we win champion loft. We were the very first loft on the west side to win the east side, right? Flying 395 concourse, right? And then I think in 2001 we switched courses to fly the 10 East. And so the East course is about a 1,300 yard per minute course, which is ideal for building a good family of pigeons, right? And so, and we did that. We switched in 2001. In 2003, we bred first AU Hall of Fame, right? In 2004, we had fifth and ninth and probably I think 28th AU Hall of Fame. And then, in 2005, we had fifth AU Hall of Fame. But at the combine level, which is our overall level, we bred seven of the top 10 champion birds in 2004. In 2005, we bred seven of the top 13 in 2005. How you breed champion birds? Well, one is, everything else that I said, your loft, the program, right? I mean, the genetics is only part of it, and I would say maybe 50% of the overall equation, but I'm thinking potentially less when you're racing the pigeons, right? When we send them to one-off races, I think you really the bird counts a lot, right? Because everybody's treated equal. When I'm racing, I know how to condition the birds. I know what to do. I know I'm putting in the work so that the bird basically excels, right? And so they're not only in physical condition, but they're also in mental condition, right? Because we know that to win a race, you have to have confidence, right? And
right,
I mean, confidence you build on, right? It's not, and that's why maybe we had an advantage of how we trained. So what we started doing is we were polygamy breeding off of our top two birds, right? So the males we had already selected who the top breeders were, right? So now we're breeding, some champion birds, and maybe we're selecting one, two, or three to go back into the breeding loft. But I mean, if they were hens, it's easy to bring in a hen because we're running a polygamy system, right? And
right.
so we need more hens to breed to those two males. But a top male, he would have to be first, second, third champion bird in order to make the cut. But, that's just what happened. But, earlier you had mentioned that, when beginners are starting and you have some early success, that potentially you should consider moving a bird into the stock loft. But I could tell you, every one of us has that story where we had a bird, in 2005. Prior to the last race was currently first AU Hall of Fame, right? And her number was 39. And we were skipping a week and then we were going to go to the 350, right? And so I was going to wake up that morning, go training. I felt a little bit lazy, and I knew the truck was going out the night before, so I put the birds in for the truck. I think I might have put 30 birds in the truck, right? I get all 30 on the drop, right? And then I see one bird take off, right? And then obviously I'm going in the loft looking for my top bird, right? Which is that bird that was first at Hall of Fame. That bird never made it home.
Oh
And
my goodness.
that happens.
Yeah.
That happens. And I mean, Jeff, I stayed outside waiting for that bird the entire day. And I'm sure everyone has this story,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and those things happen and they're gonna hurt. If people don't know racing pigeons, we lose a lot of racing pigeons, right? This is not an easy sport, right?
Yeah.
And so it's hard. I mean, we lose good pigeons and sometimes we lose bad pigeons, right? So,
Yeah, I had the champion bird of our club and combine, and wanted to send him to one more 500-mile race before he retired. I had a box for him. I had his individual pin. I even had the hen I was going to put him with when he arrived home from the 500, and I never saw him again. And so I can recover from something like that because I have a loft
oh,
of
yeah.
super pigeons. But for a new guy, that can be, 10, you could have 10 years of breeding from a bird like that. And so it still, to me, bothers me today.
Oh yeah. I mean, I that bird 39 that I lost in 2005, that's 20 years ago. I still remember
still
that
think
bird.
about it. Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
still hurts me when I talk about it, right? So,
Exactly. So you got to be careful. Sometimes one more time is too
oh
many.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But we're
Um,
all shooting for that exceptional pigeon, right? But
right.
I think being observant, right? And I don't know if you may have noticed something with the bird you lost, right? But if we're very observant, sometimes they communicate. Like I said, I go in the morning, at 5:30, turn on the lights, knock on the side, and birds would go down to the floor because they were excited to go road training. So if a bird hesitated to go down to the floor, that bird is communicating to you that it's potentially hurt, right? That it's potentially not feeling up for road training that morning, right? Same thing when they land on your loft. Birds that basically land and shoot right and go right in, right? They understand the program. If a bird basically lands and hesitates, there's something wrong, right? Something's happened to that bird. So you got to be very observant, I think.
Yeah, and I think another thing I wrote down I was going to mention earlier that you said that we preach here is building around and utilizing the birds that make it easy on you, which means
Yeah.
they follow your system, they understand your expectations, they communicate with you on what you're wanting, they they do the things that make it much easier for you. If you have birds that are being difficult or not following the system, you're going to end up spending time trying to correct that stuff instead of the time you could be putting into the ones that are doing things the right way. And typically, the ones doing the things the right way and making it easier for you are the ones who become your champions anyway. So I think it's important for people to pay attention to which birds are communicating and
Yeah.
which birds are showing you that they understand your expectations and what you're wanting to do. And beware of spending too much time and money and energy on birds that aren't quite getting what you're wanting, and you're not quite getting the system you're trying to implement. They're not quite getting it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I know my wife's the loft manager, but we're managers, right? Our job is to manage, right? And so if you're not doing what Jeff just said, you're not managing, right? Because that's your job is to protect the gene pool so that you could be successful. but you first have to know what you have, right? So
Right.
if so now, Jeff, because can we switch to when I started one lap racing, or did you
Uh,
want? Do you have any other questions around basically the racing? Because I mean, I could talk about racing
Oh yeah.
because
No, we
it
can
was
switch to one loft racing. I wanted to ask you though, before we switch to one loft racing, this is a fun question for me to ask because some people are very passionate with their answer. Some people don't believe in this. Some people do. I want to see what you say though. Do you have key traits that you look for when you're selecting your breeders? If you're going to acquire, like you said, there's one or two birds maybe you'll bring in here or there.
yeah.
I watch your Facebook consistently. I see the super collection of pigeons you have. Are there key traits you're looking for, or are you looking more
I
at the results and the
yeah.
blood? What is it?
So I think for me, if I'm gonna basically go digging for gold, I'm gonna go to a mine that is producing gold, not a mine that was producing gold 10 years ago, a mine that is producing gold now, right? And
Right,
so by seeing that, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the dominant genetics that are producing a high percentage of race winners, right? Whether they're and we'll have to talk about this, but I am a big believer that there are breeders that only breed breeders that don't breed race winners, right? So I've encountered that, right? So now I basically make sure that when I'm looking to buy a pigeon, right, I want to see a high percentage of a high percentage of that bird either breeding breeders or breeding race winners, right? And then I'm going to buy directly from that. So I'm willing to pay more from that. It's possible if you can't, it's possible to buy, like a grandchild of that bird. But I think the closer you get to the gold, the higher percentages you could get, right? And so I see a lot of people pushing birds out, and I'm gonna apologize by saying pushing birds, but I think once you get to great grandfather, I think at that point the percentage of that super bird is so small that I think you can't really say that, right? And so I had a person ask me this week, or I think last week, and he asked me, what is the bloodline of Wolverine? Right? And the answer that I gave is the bloodlines come when a pigeon becomes famous, right? Oh, and an example is basically, say like Cannibal, right? Today, a lot of people think Cannibal is a bloodline, right? And I'm more of a believer that that's what you should call bloodline. It's an individual pigeon because that's the pigeon that made that bloodline famous, right? And so now if you're buying a child off that pigeon, then to me, that is as close as you could get, right? Now, if you get a grandchild, if you really start looking at the genetics and you start looking at the breakdown, I mean, if you're doing line breeding, I could potentially see, that you're keeping more of the genetics. But the further you get from the famous pigeon, I think your odds are going down. But as breeders, we're not trying to just reproduce a pigeon. We're constantly trying to make a better pigeon, right? And so if we're adding something to our base, we want to try to see, can we make a better pigeon, right? And so for me, I'm looking for which pigeons are dominant. And I'm going to use an example, right? And so we know 611, right? You're familiar with 611 and how dominant he was in Pattaya, right? And
right,
and if you and Mike did on a great job buying the parents to Gold Diamond winner, right? And
right.
if you look at the number of birds that came down from that set of birds, I think it's a very high percentage, right? And so if I'm looking to buy a bird, I'm going to basically potentially buy something off that pair because I know that pair is producing a high percentage of breeders or race winners, right? Or both, right? And so, the and so I'm a big fan of Mike, right? So I will
Of
just use
course.
another example. I think Thomas Six, I think he's a super bird, right? I could say that we've got in our loft, we have an inbred son of Thomas Six. Thomas Six made it to the queen, right? Queen is probably one of my ultimate favorite pigeons that I've ever held, right? And so, and we have a full sister to Thomas Six. Both of them are proven, right? And so, and they seem to blend very well with my GFL 78 bird. And I don't know if you know about this bird, but he's father and grandfather to 69 first or equal first in club or one-off races here in Mexico, here in the US and in Mexico.
That's incredible.
69 69 is not easy, right? And I'm not saying they're all finals, right? Because I mean, if there were 69 finals, everyone would know this, right? But still, 69
No,
first
that's
or equal
incredible.
first,
Yeah.
right? So, and that's my base. So when I'm looking to add, I'm looking, is there any other bird that's showing dominance? And I don't really care about it's this family or that family. I don't. I really look at birds individually, right? Individually, does this bird basically showing the dominance that I think I want to take a chance with?
And
But in saying that, Jeff, we could spend money to basically buy the best, but there is no guarantee,
no,
right? And no matter how much money you spend, if that doesn't click, you have to have a process where you try to prove the birds in the minimum amount of time, and then if they basically don't pass, they have to be eliminated. And if you're not eliminating that, you should not call yourself loft manager
right.
because you're not managing, right? So,
Well, what about in the hand? Do you have anything you like to feel, or is
so,
that something you put to the side and focus more on the bloodlines?
so one is the genetics basically should tell you what speeds they do well in and what distance they fly well in. And I really think that the speeds almost tell you the distance, right? Because if you have if in order to fly 350 400 miles and you're doing this in 11 12 1300 yards per minute, it's many hours in the air, right? And so if you're going to try to send a short distance pigeon genetic wise to a 350 or 400, I think if the speeds are what I'm talking about, 11, 12, 1300 yards per minute, I don't think you're going to get that short distance bird to score. You know, you'd be even lucky if you could get him to come home. And that's just my opinion. I know that there's a big move right now that sprint pigeons could be used as to send to build a strong family for one-off racing. And I'm in favor of anyone basically trying to find what works, right? Because if you're finding that something that works, then that's great, right? For me, my thought is if if my scope is basically 350, 400 miles, 8 to 12 hours in the air, I'm going to look for genetics that can basically fly that endurance, right? And so one is it starts with genetics. I know a lot of people when I say genetics, it eventually means pedigree, but a pedigree without results does not mean anything, right? And the results have to be in the area you're trying to look for, right? I'm looking for endurance. I'm looking for a bird that's producing winners at 350, 400 miles, right? And so that's what I'm going to look for. And I want to see a high percentage of race winners. Now, when I say high percentage of race winners, I think people that are not in pigeons don't understand what that means. When we say high percentage, at least in my opinion, 15% is high percentage.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you're thinking high percentages that this bird is going to produce, 50% of race winners, I'm like, you're in the wrong sport.
No,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah. You're very lucky if you breed 100 pigeons. You're very lucky if you get three or four that are super. It's
Exactly. We're looking for super. We're not looking
right.
for good. So
Right.
when we're talking that small percentage, we're looking for super. I mean, I'm sure if I was looking for good, the percentages go higher. But so that's kind of what I'm aiming for, right? I've been very lucky and have acquired some good pigeons early on, and then through my process of proving out pigeons, I could identify the better. And then then I start building then I start building foundation out of the better, right? And then you progressively add to that, and you check to see, is it working, right? And if it's working, then you've done your job. But the way that I describe it to people sometimes is like a recipe, right? You've made a great dinner, and you don't just basically throw stuff in there, right? I mean, whatever stuff there, you're going to ruin it, right? But
Right.
no, if you add something and it makes it taste better, then okay, you've done your job. But if you've added something and it didn't make it taste better, I eliminate the entire line, right? So if I for some reason had children and grandchildren and I don't see that this was working, boom, that whole thing goes out, right? So all the lineage that is carrying genetics, I eliminate.
Well, let's get into the one loft side of things. When
Yeah.
did that start for you? And what do you think of one loft versus club racing as far as the trend that seems to be going that direction?
So, so if only, well, I would say, and that only if you've flown pigeons and you've been successful, you will understand that nothing could replace that, right?
Yeah,
Seeing that bird come home, right? I mean, it is, and
that's it.
I have memories from my AU Hall of Fame bird, right? And if you give me time, I will basically share a few of these memories,
Sure.
right? But so, I think we were flying, I forgot if I'm thinking it was maybe 200 miles, right? And he had already started shining, right? And so I was the club secretary, and one of the members had called me and asked, as if well, let me start all over again. So let me give a little bit more context, right? Normally my wife and I wake up at 6:30 in the morning regardless of the distance, and we set up the antennas, right? And then we have coffee, and then we're excited for the time that we could start looking for birds, right? And like I said, my wife, she's the one that calls in the birds. My job was just to look for birds, right? So that day my wife wasn't feeling well. We knew the birds weren't going to come in till later in the afternoon, right? And so I got up, I set up the antennas, right? It's foggy, it's a foggy morning, and I thought, okay, the antennas are set up. I could go back in, have some coffee, relax, and then come back, later. And so as I was walking in the house, I see a shadow, right? And I'm like, "Wait, it's too early for a bird to have a bird, right?" And then we clocked the bird, and I'm thinking, my God, it's our number one pigeon. So you know how excited that is,
Oh
Steph,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
And so then I get a phone call from one of my friends, and he's a very competitive friend, right? And he's like, "Hey, what time are we expecting birds?" And I told them that, I didn't want to tell them I had a bird, but I told them that, it looks like it's going to be a fast race. I think you need to get ready to receive birds now, right? And I just said that, right? And because I couldn't lie, first of all, right? But I also didn't want to give him. I also didn't want to tell him how excited I was that I already had clocked the bird, right? So, but that was such a good story, and we all have those, right? And
Right.
so when in the one laugh races, you get excited when you win, right? Because I mean, we start with seeing that the birds are clocking well, right? And you start building that emotion. And so when you do well in the finals, right, if you're on the first drop or if you're in the front group, it's very exciting. But I don't think it is as exciting as when you race yourself, right? And
Oh yeah.
so
Yeah.
we started the one off race game in 2006. I think the initial kickoff was the politics that happened in the combine,
Yep.
right? And so it basically drove us out. I was race secretary, my wife was combine secretary, and there was just so much politics, right? So we decided, hey, we're going to step away from club racing, going to start the one off racing. So 2006 is our first year, right? And we started off with the Summer Classic, Vegas Classic. I don't know if you
Yep.
remember Vegas Classic run by Subit, right? So we had a good pigeon there. I think we scored eighth and third average speed, right? And then we almost took all the pools, right? And so, it was exciting, right? It was our first year, right? And so we were like, whoa, this is nice, right? And then, that was the 2006 was the first year of World Days Challenge. I don't know if you remember
Yeah.
that. So we sent a team to World Days Challenge, and right from the start, we started doing super well. I mean, we had a hen that that basically was in front from the first race all the way up to the final, right? And so, and this hen, she was leading, right? And so we were going into the 300, and my wife, I'm on the phone, I'm at work, I'm calling my wife to find out, have we clocked any birds, right? And my wife's basically looking, and the first bird that's clocked is this hen, right? And so so then now we're going into the 350 because the series is basically an average speed series. It pays only for average speed, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
first average speed is $300,000, right? And so now we're going into the 350 and we're leading, right? We're probably maybe 20 minutes in the lead, right? We're going into the 350. I'm monitoring, obviously I'm calling my wife, right? So we're monitoring, which birds are coming in. And man, the second bird behind ours clocks, right? And it's already getting dark, right? And then our bird clocks in the dark, and they had to basically walk it into the trap so that it would trap because it was already too dark,
Right.
right? But now,
Wow.
so now we've done really well from the 150 all the way to the 350. We're leading by 38 minutes, right? And so then we fly out, to the 400, and when you're leading, you do not want to see bad weather, right? So
Right.
we
Right.
land, the skies are dark, right? It's windy, and I'm thinking, no, this is not good. But it's pigeon blind, right? And so we're basking the birds, right? And we get a phone call while we're there. And I didn't get a phone call. I think Chris Peeman got the phone call. And we had just won Mega Classic in San Diego,
Oh,
right? Mega
wow.
Classic is combined, San Diego Classic,
Right.
Holiday Cup, Triple Crown, and California Classic, right? So we had just won that race, and that bird is a full brother to the bird that's leading the World Ace Challenge. It's also a full brother to the bird that was third average speed at the Vegas Classic, right? And so, man, but yeah, I'm not super thrilled, right? Chris is, I had another bird from the other line, right? Because I had two males, like I mentioned before, right? This hen was out of Malta, made it to a daughter of young bull. But I also had another bird that was doing really well. That was young bull, made it to a daughter of Malta. And so I first handled the bird from young bull, the one that's not leading, but that bird handles super, right? And so I mean, you knew this bird was going to score, right? So I pulled that bird, and then Chris asked me, "Why aren't you pulling the other bird?" Because now I've handled the other bird. She's not feeling like in super top condition, right? And so I'm like, man, if I'm gonna bet, I'm just gonna bet everything on this one, right? And so Chris convinced me that we should go in and bet on the $1,000 winner take all, right? And so we did it, right? And so now the race comes in, it's a crappy day, it's starting to get dark, we get a drop. I think the male that I pulled was in that first drop. And
Oh,
then,
wow.
now we're waiting, we're 38 minutes ahead, it's already dark, right? So we're thinking, if she just makes it, whether it's minutes late, we could still win, right? And so she didn't make it on the day. We get there maybe 6:30, maybe even earlier the next day. I mean, 300,000 is a lot of money, right?
All
But
right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so we're sitting there waiting and waiting, and our flight leaves maybe at say 2 or 3 o'clock, right? And so at 1 o'clock, we're thinking, man, we should probably start heading to the airport. So we were gonna miss her, and we thought maybe she just wasn't gonna make it because I didn't think she was in a top form. So right before we leave, she clocks, and then the loft manager calls us up, and she broke her leg,
Oh,
right? And
wow.
so I don't know if she broke her leg. She broke it up right around the elbow, right? And so
Wow.
I don't know if it was on the first 200 miles or the second 200 miles, but those birds at that time went up for auction. And so we had eighth average speed with the male that was first drop, and then we had 31st average speed with a hen that was leading. The hen sold for 18,200 and the male sold for $9,000, right?
Wow.
And this is our very first year, right? So we scored in Vegas Classic, we scored in San Diego, we scored in Texas, and we're thinking, whoa, is it really this easy?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, right? I mean, we
Right,
all know that. But
right.
then the following year we send a bird to fly at Espo's East Coast Challenge, right? That's they fly from like 150 to I think 350. And our bird was first drop on every toss. And the only toss that it was not first drop, it was second in the clock on the 300.
Oh, wow.
And that's who wins first champion bird. So, I had offers to sell that bird. I mean, he was, I think, the best record that year. Espo was flying in New Jersey. The average speed was probably somewhere in the 1,100 yards per minute, so it was all headwinds, right? And I don't believe in selling your top performers, right? I think if you're going to stay in the sport, you got to keep the best, right? And I'm now breeding this bird, thinking, man, I hit the jackpot. He's just super. I mean, perfect in the hand, right? I mean, he's buoyant. I mean, and buoyancy is earlier you had asked me about what I look for. I think intelligence number one, buoyancy has to be number two, right? And that's because if you want to win in the finals, the
Yeah,
350, 400, you're not going to have a heavy pigeon basically make it home from a 400, right? And so
right.
buoyancy is my number two. And so now I think I have this magic bird, right? I breed it with all my top hens. For 2 years, I send them to the one-off races. Every bird is a dud, right? And I'm like, what? This super bird is not producing, right? But I always sell pigeons, and I sell pigeons as a way for people to help me prove them out,
Yeah,
right? And specifically, they're proving them out as breeders, right? And so Andy Claw has a son off of East Coast, right? His band number is LK 664. He is the grandfather to the first AU Hall of Fame, right? Miss America, right? And so, but it wasn't just the Andy's bird. I was getting calls from other people that had children from East Coast, and they were also producing winners, right? And I'm like, and I had heard that reading books that sometimes the top racers skip a generation, right? And
yeah.
so I'm a huge believer, right? Because I witnessed that, right? And so, which when you start explaining that to somebody just getting into the sport, you can imagine I mean, it complicates things, right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
but I
Yeah,
do believe you need to prove them out, right? You need to know what you have, and part of that is this, right? Is finding out, are they breeding race winners? Are they breeding, just breeders, right? It's to your own good if you know what you have.
and so the moral of the story is that if you didn't test some of those by selling some of those, you didn't test them as breeders, you may not have known the value of him as a breeder and passing that on to the grandchildren through the direct children.
Oh yeah.
That's something that is interesting, how a bird can be such a super racer, but it skips a generation like that. I've had that with my birds as well. Some of my top performers, their children end up being super racers as well.
Oh, yeah. And I wanted to bring that example up, right? Because we've all heard that, but so maybe it's only when you experience it that you realize that it's really true, right? Because I mean, I'm sure you heard that before it happened to you, right? So,
Yep. And one of my top breeding hens raced at the Hoosier in 2021, and she had some good training, and she had one particularly really good race, but the final two races she came in the next day, and I kind of thought that was odd. So when I got her back, she, was perfect in the hand. She was really high IQ, really intelligent. She made it up immediately, and I tried her just, I don't know why I did it, but I did, and she has produced, I think, uh, four or five one loft winners. The champion bird I lost is a son of hers. I don't understand why, but she just produces super racers. And so sometimes you got to
But
get a
you,
little lucky.
oh yeah, well, a lot of times you have to get lucky, right? But you saw something in that, right? And
Yeah.
so, that I think it's I I I I know that we've heard, right, that some people just seem to basically know everything, right? Or do everything right. And I think it's the pigeons that basically help us make that decision, right? So did we really know or did we just get lucky, right? Because I mean, like I said, I bought this one William de Bruin bird, and that bird, all his children are what was scoring that made us win champion loft the 2 years after we started, right? And then I bought two other birds, right? The son of the Bull 777, the Malta, brother of Natasha and Ricardo, right? I breed them with each other and boom, they just hit, right? And so did I know more than I should have? I don't know. I have to say a lot of it is luck, right? And we luck into these birds that make it look easy. And maybe that's the part I was trying to get at is we start the one loft racing, and man, the very first and second year, 2006 and 7, it was like, my goodness, this is easy. I'm gonna take everybody's money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It quickly
It's
can change sometimes, but no,
it
you've got it right though. You have to follow the data and increase
yeah,
your percentages. And I tell people this all the time that pigeon racing is all about winning seconds at a time. So if you can make a change in your program that gains you 10 seconds, you've seen it.
exactly.
You've seen it many times in club racing. I've seen it many times where you win a race by 1 or 2 seconds. You can do little tweaks and improvements that gain you those seconds. And
Yeah,
so you want to increase your odds by having the loft right. You want to have the right bloodlines with the best genetics possible for whatever your goal is, whatever race it is,
yeah.
whatever location it is. And I think adding all that, combining all that with a really nice loft that is, well ventilated and clean and has, rodent free and all the things you're talking about, all of that is a blueprint to increase your odds to where, yeah, there's luck and there's times where, things go better than other years or go worse than other years, but you're going to increase your odds and gain those seconds by doing the little details to set yourself up the right way. And I think that you've definitely shared the blueprint for people to follow in order to do that. I've
But
got
Jeff,
more. What's that?
one of the things that you said, right, is that it's you have a blueprint, and we think that this is what it takes to succeed, but everyone is looking at what everybody else is doing. Everyone is having thoughts, how do they make improvements, right? And so my thought is that you do it very slowly,
Yeah,
right? And you don't change everything. And you find out, and that's not only in just your management program, but that's also in the genetics, right? Start slowly, don't change too much, and then see, do you see a benefit or you don't, right? Because I think you know, sometimes people could overdo things, and an example, right, is you could overdo vitamins, and you're thinking that more vitamins is better, right?
right.
Do too much vitamins. And I mean, one of the examples that I'll give towards thinking that more vitamins is better, it was during our racing season, right? When we were racing, we started noticing that the birds were basically dropping two flights at the same time, right?
Mm,
And I would tell you that was the vitamins. That was so here we're thinking that more is better in this case, and it wasn't, right? And so you have to be able to detect that, to learn from it, right? But the basis is don't rush, right? If you're going to change something, so just change something slowly, right? And then see if you see the effect that you're looking for. If you don't, then why are you adding this additional variable? It's just going to even add it more. It's going to make it even more complicated, right? So just know whether something is working. And if it's working, great, you move with it. If it's not working, then don't do it just because somebody else is doing it.
right. and making drastic changes, especially in the middle of your season, that's never
Oh,
panning
that's
out. That's about as bad a thing you can do. You really throw them off at that point.
it is that is
Yeah,
just I mean that's just dumb.
yeah,
Let's be
yeah,
honest here, right?
and
But
yeah, and so there is lots to learn and lots to tweak along the way, and finding what works for you in your area of the country or the world, wherever you're watching from. We're running out of time. You and I haven't met before this, and so getting to know you here, I enjoy talking pigeons with you. So we're definitely going to have you back on because you and I have a lot more I'd like to cover. But let's start. Let's end with this. Do you have a proudest moment of all the racing you've done, whether it's club or one loft? You know, you've already given a few examples with the Hall of Famers and stuff, but is there something that your proudest moment that you'll never forget in the pigeon sport, even though you've had plenty? Is there one that sticks out that you haven't told us about?
oh man, I mean, well, I think I mentioned all the highlights, right? Including losing that super bird, but there was one other story, right? So, we can I say two stories? Because it's
Absolutely,
really
yeah.
cute. All right, so basically, we're flying the fraternity the following week, and so we're the fraternity I think might have been a 325. This week was a 290. And my wife had light grizzles at that time. And so I had this super, super hen. And so I wanted to bring in the grizzle color. So I bought a grizzle male that I knew had produced some quality, right? And so I bred it to my number one best hen. Now I have I had a set of sisters that had been flying very well. And so we're flying the 290. It was a tough race, right? And so both hands come together, right? So two nestmates, two grizzles come together, and I think we might have been third and fourth in the 395 concourse, right? And so now the next week we're flying the fraternity, and so I was running the fraternity at that time, and I pulled those two hands because I'm like, hey, they did well on the 290, so let's see if they can repeat it, right? And so we're sitting at home. We have people at the house, watching. And so we get one bird in like very early, right? And this bird was a daughter out of the William de Bruin cock that we had just bought, that we had started with, right? And so, and here I'm like, man, where are those grizzle hens, right? Because those are the ones that I expected, right? And so I don't remember how many minutes later, but minutes later, the two sisters come in, right? And so, and we took in the fraternity, we took first, third, and fourth, right? And third and fourth were the sisters, and I think I picked up all the pool money, right? So,
Wow.
so that's one really good, memory, right? And
Oh
and it's
yeah.
because how do you have nestmates that come together 2 weeks in a row and from a distance of 290 and 325, right? And
Yeah.
so
It's almost
now,
unheard of.
oh yeah, and the fact that there were grizzles that made it so
Oh
exciting, right?
yeah.
Because you knew they were the only two grizzles in the loft, so
Yeah.
you know who they were, right? And so then in 2005, I don't know if I was running that fraternity, but in 2005, we it was going to be our last year. A lot of people didn't really like us because we were doing very well, right? And so we go to the fraternity and the pigeons, they weren't handling the way people used to handle our birds, right? They weren't as ballooned as what people used to know, right? And so people were making fun, right, that they're going to beat us in the fraternity, right? And so I pulled all the way across, right? Because I'm thinking, I know what I did, and I'll see if you can guess what I did, right? So I pulled all the way across. A lot of people were basically making fun that they're going to beat us, right? And so now race day comes, and then I think we took all the money. I think we got first, and that same fraternity. I think we got first, third, and fourth. But we had four birds on the drop. One of them wasn't a fraternity bird, right? And somebody on the long end just barely snuck in second, right? But I had pulled my first, third, and fourth and cleaned house. Now, how I did it, I basically took the week off from work. I
Hmm.
went and did 30 minutes I did 30 minutes in the morning on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays, and then I did 30 minutes in the evening, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So why were the birds not ballooned? Because they were worked a little bit hard, right?
Right.
But but when and so I knew that I knew how they acted, right? But they didn't feel like what people think of when they think the bird's in super condition, right? But I knew how they acted in the loft. I knew how they were coming in the evening, when we were training evenings. Now I didn't train evening on Friday because I didn't want to overdo it, but man, we were so hot, right? And it was, and now I only did that 1 year. I just wonder if I would have done that, or if anyone's done that, can you repeat that same thing, right?
Right.
Was it that, right? My thought was is that shorter tosses morning and evening, it basically gets them it gets them into the right mental state, right, to race home.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. But so that was very exciting. And it was even more exciting because we had so many people that wanted us to lose,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So
Well, and we've been talking about Gannis. One of Mike's best quotes or his slogan is "Nobody likes a winner," right? So,
oh yeah.
but yeah, that's pretty incredible, and I do think that those short sprints really not only it locks it exercises their homing ability. I think that's something that's underrated is the homing ability and pigeons and how quickly they can home and get home and are passionate about coming home. And so
Yeah.
that's pretty great. We have more we can cover in the next time we need to do this again. I've enjoyed talking to you and I think you and I could talk all night about pigeons.
I agree. I was
Yeah,
like, I'm
it's
just getting
fun.
started.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you? Because, like I said earlier, I'm friends with you on Facebook and follow what you have on there. You have a lot of awesome pigeon posts. I saw, you posted all your breeders from almost every decade and I sign and their accomplishments, and you have an incredible collection of pigeons. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and follow along?
Yeah, we used to back in the days we used to have a website, lkcorral.com, but we don't have it anymore, right? And so we used to back in the days, my wife actually did the website and she got tired of making all the updates, and so we just let it go. And so now it's just Facebook, right? I mean, if
Yeah,
you're using Facebook and like you see that my Facebook account, LK Corral, is only for pigeons, right?
yeah,
But it is a huge pigeon community, right?
yeah,
So if you have Facebook, if you create a Facebook account and you only use it for pigeons, I think it could be great.
yeah. Can't agree with that more. Um, so people can add you on there, and if they want to
Yeah.
buy a bird or get advice, they can reach out to you there, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't have secrets, right? I don't believe in secrets. So I share what we know, right? And I think having this channel, Jeff, I think it's super, right? I mean, I've listened to almost every one of your meetings, right? And
Thank you.
your interviews, and I really think if you listen to enough, you will see a lot of common things, right, from just about everybody, right? And
Yeah,
so, so if you notice all these common things, apply those same common things, right? And then make gradual changes, and then also don't rush into anything, right? I think people, that's where a lot of people I think make mistakes, right? Is take the time, if you live close to somebody who's flying well, then go visit his loft, right? Learn what he does to be successful, and like you said earlier, choose somebody who's doing well, right?
yeah, right.
Because
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I
That
will
that's
tell you
important.
that. Oh yeah, because I will tell you that even if you go talk to somebody who's not doing well, he's got plenty to share with
Oh
you,
yeah,
but
oh yeah,
I just don't know that's going to be beneficial. But you should always, yeah, I mean, you should always basically try to find somebody who's doing well and who's willing to share the information. And there's many that are willing to share, right? So,
yeah,
and there's also so many good books out there, right? I mean, some of my favorite times or my favorite memories, Jeff, is basically waiting for the sun to come up and I was reading a pigeon book, right? And it's reading about, some pigeon stories from the 60s and 70s, right? Those are really great memories. So,
Yeah, and appreciating the history of the sport and how they did it in the past and how it correlates with now and in the future. All that stuff's important, and it's the little edge you can get every time, those little
oh yeah.
seconds we're trying to add. So that's awesome. You and I have a lot in common. I think it's great that you partner and, your wife helps you manage the loft and my wife and I race the birds together as well. And, so I think that's awesome and that's great. And, I'd love to have you back on in the future if you'd like to come back on and keep talking pigeons. I enjoyed it. So
I I mean, I can't, my wife will tell you I don't really shut up, right? And so I love talking pigeons. I'm a busy guy outside of pigeons, but so when I get the chance to talk pigeons, it's good for me,
yeah,
right? So
great.
anytime.
I'd love to meet you in person at some point, maybe at one of these one loft races or something in the
Yeah,
future. But before then, we'll definitely have you back on and keep talking. And it's been a lot of fun. Lolo Ramirez, LK Corral. Thank you again. And people can reach out to you on Facebook if they want to contact you, and we'll have you back on again soon. I appreciate it.
sounds good. Thank you,
All right,
Jeff.
thanks.